and what brings them there, and how we have to break down this disparity between those who have opportunities and those who don't. What are you seeing in Alabama and really nationally in terms of criminal justice system? How do we fix it?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and as Michelle has pointed out, I mean, we're just a fundamentally different country today than we were 40 years ago, and most of you know these data, and it is pretty shocking, and you can't hear it enough. In 1972, we had 300,000 people in jails and prisons. Today, we have 2.3 million. With nearly 6 million people on probation and parole, under criminal justice control. And these data suggest that everything has changed. And I totally agree with Michelle's assessment that it's not just about crime. It's certainly not about that. It's about a broader political reality. And one of the things that we are dealing with is this phenomena of the politics of fear and anger. We've had politicians for 40 years preaching to everybody, be afraid and be angry. And when people are afraid and angry, they can actually reconcile themselves to violating basic human rights. Basic human dignity can be ignored. You look at every historical example of horrific abuse, genocide, the Holocaust. All of these institutions were created and sustained by a political vision, fueled by fear, sustained by anger. And when you listen to our politicians talking about the issues that we're trying to talk about today, they don't get anywhere near the truth. They get to this fear and anger dynamic. And what that has done is create a lot of casualties. And the casualties are the most vulnerable people in our society. 1996, we passed a Welfare Reform Act that actually allows states to bar people from public benefits, food stamps, housing, certain medical services, if they have a prior drug conviction. In our lifetime, we have created a new caste of people in American society who I think of as our untouchables. These are people living beneath the public benefit system, mostly women with children. The women having prior drug convictions. It's the poor. We have a criminal justice system that is incredibly wealth dependent. No matter how innocent you are, no matter how strong your alibi, no matter the fact that you didn't do anything wrong, doesn't shield you from arrest, prosecution, conviction, and even long-term incarceration. Our system treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. Not culpability shapes outcomes, and so the poor are being destroyed by this era. It's the mentally ill. Many of the people who've been sent to jails and prisons are disabled by mental illness. We don't treat mental illness in poor and minority communities. We just throw people into jail and prison. We don't help children who are dealing with these developmental disabilities or coming out of households where they're struggling. We put them in jail and prison. We pull them out of the schools because they can't deal with these kinds of cultural norms. We call them criminal. We put them in juvenile detention facilities, and they get on this pipeline to prison. And what I think that creates is this phenomenon that requires a deeper look, a deeper reality. Of all the vulnerabilities that I'm most concerned about, it is the plight of young people. It's children. I work in communities where the kids that I'm working with tell me by the time they're 13 or 14 that they don't believe that they're going to be free or alive by the time they're 21. And there's never been a time in the African-American community's history where that was true. Where that was true. And it breaks my heart, but these kids will say to me when we start having truthful conversations, they say, Mr. Stevenson, I know I'm going to be in prison by the time I'm 21. Or I'm going to be effectively dead, or dead from gun violence, or gang violence, or drug violence. And they tell me I have to go out here and get mine while I can. And that mindset, which is so rooted in hopelessness, cannot be intimidated. You can't pass tough laws to turn people around who already believe that their lives are going to be over by 21. You can't talk about programs in some kind of ethereal way. You actually have to engage these children, engage these communities, and fight that hopelessness with something hopeful. And one of our big challenges is that too few of us have hope about what we can do. And what I learned as a young child is, you won't buy what you can't sell. If you don't have hope, you can't give it to somebody who needs it. And so we have to find a voice of hopefulness to turn these things around. And so for us it means challenging all of the problems that Michelle has outlined, ending the war on drugs, ending mass incarceration, but also ending this abusive punishment, this excessive punishment. We're the only country in the world that condemns children to die in prison. The United States is the only country in the world where 13-year-old children have been sentenced to die in prison, life imprisonment without parole. We're the only country besides Somalia that has refused to sign the Covenant on the Rights of the Child.
That's the doctrine that actually prevents children from being enslaved and abused and prosecuted. The reason why we won't sign it is because there's a provision in there about no death penalty and no life in prison. And we're unwilling to sign it because of that, and we're being held hostage by these politics of fear and anger. So we do have to completely fundamentally reorient. And for me, what that means is finding this voice of hopefulness. I think that all of the young people in this room are absolutely going to be the foot soldiers of this movement, just in the ways that African Americans were foot soldiers of civil. Because you are proximate to the children, you are proximate to the communities that have given up on you, that have designated you to be nothing more than your worst act. And it will take your witness, your voice, your leadership to challenge all of those who say, this is as good as it gets. And it's in that context that I think we all have big challenges in front of us. One of the great opportunities we have is to build on this legacy. I think while history has a lot to teach us about where we are with regard to racial control and social control, it also has a lot to teach to us on how we struggle, how we move forward, how we find the will to be courageous even when it doesn't seem comfortable, how we learn the things we need to do. And I think we have to be a community. This movement has to be a movement that recognizes that sometimes you've got to stand when everybody else is sitting. Sometimes you've got to speak when everybody else is quiet. And a lot of the times when we encounter resistance, which we will, I just argued 2 cases at the United States Supreme Court trying to get the court to ban life without parole sentences imposed on children. And at the end of those arguments, I was hopeful that the court might do the right thing, and they did, thank the Lord. But I was also worried that there was that kind of hostility, that kind of resistance from recognizing that children, all children are children. And when I left, I thought about, well, how is it that we confront that? And for me, it is sometimes looking back. People say, well, it must be hard representing kids on death row. Nothing is as hard as it could have been for those who were trying to find their voice in the 1950s to confront the first Jim Crow. It was so much harder to find your voice to confront convict leasing and lynching, find your voice to find slavery. So that means that all of us have really no excuse. We have no excuse. We have got to fight this fight. We do. And sometimes we just have to remind ourselves. I remind myself all the time. My lawyers come and say, I don't know if we can do this. I'm feeling tired. I said, you know what? You need to think about where we are. I've had to do a lot of difficult things, but I've never had to say my head is bloody but not bowed. And when you think about that, you find a way forward. So I do think that there are some immediate opportunities for that. The movement that Michelle is talking about, there are broader challenges of engaging these kids. We can't just talk to the policymakers and the power brokers. We also have to talk to our kids, our communities, those who have lost their hope, those who have lost their voice. And we've got to hold them close enough to show them that if we really believe in what we understand about redemption and recovery and reconciliation, we can do better than what we're seeing in the urban communities that Mayor Nutter has talked about and the jails and prisons that have swallowed up so many of our youth. Thank you.